I think all of us need to spend some time going inward and seeing what's happening. It doesn't mean we all have these huge, horrible things in there, but life is messy. We get hurt. If we've ever been hurt, if we've ever been betrayed, if we've ever, you know, lost a relationship, it doesn't mean all those things create something, but there's no way to go through life without getting hit by any of that. And so I think it's important to just assess from time to time, what am I hanging on to that I didn't realize might still be impacting the way that I hear people speak, the way that I interpret people's behavior, their reactions, the way that I'm hearing my child talk, the way that I'm hearing my partner talk. There's just so much in that people realize too late. One of the biggest things people say to me is, I wish I had started this work sooner.
Laurel Wiers, you are very welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm looking forward to it. As always, I reach out to people when I really just have a personal interest in exploring their speciality. And as I said before we hit record, I've noticed throughout my life how when you don't have control over your emotional triggers, it can lead to chaos. It can lead to just problems in your life, but it can
Mhm.
lead to chaos. So I've been really interested in listening to how you talk about that. But my first question, I suppose, is the obvious question is your specialty now is trauma. So how do you define trauma?
Thanks for asking that question because it's something that I get asked a lot. And I actually like to say I'm careful to even use the word trauma. So, right, trauma is something that gets stuck, stored in your body, right? Stored in your psyche. It's the impact. I like to say what Gabor Mate says, the impact that's left over. It's not the event, but what you're left with. But a lot of times people think of trauma and they discount themselves initially because they think I wasn't in a car accident, I wasn't in war, I wasn't abused, so therefore I have not experienced trauma. But what they don't realize is that any negative life event, any aversive event gets stored the same way in our system as what they call trauma, right? And so that's that difference between big T trauma, I call it, and little t traumas. Most of us think of big T traumas, which are those huge events, but little t trauma, it gets wired in us the same way and then it gets overlooked.
So you mentioned Gabor Mate, and I was watching him on a podcast the other day, and I think he's 80 years of age now, and
Mhm.
he told the story of his upbringing, which is like very traumatic.
Yes.
And I was watching him on YouTube, and he talks now like a very peaceful man,
Mhm.
but he looks like a very sad
Mhm.
man. I haven't met him, but he
Mhm.
looks like someone who has experienced a lot of sadness in his life. And I suppose that's how I see trauma, that level
Mhm.
of impact.
Mhm.
What you're saying is that's not always the case.
Exactly. Yeah, he says trauma is not the event that happened, but the imprint it leaves upon your mind, body, right, and soul in so
When
many
you,
ways.
so when you look at him, the vibe I get is that that imprint is still deeply there.
Yes.
Like he's worked through it, maybe mentally, emotionally, but it still carries it. That's my impression of him.
Absolutely, yes, and he's been through what you would call, right, some big T traumas, right?
Yeah,
His mother went through, the Holocaust, all of
yeah,
that, and I do think there's that genetic imprinting that
yes,
happens also, generational trauma. It's a real thing in the way that it comes out in you, and yes, I've listened to him a lot as well, I love him, and has even talked about his journey, really, he keeps hitting these other levels of, I
yeah.
thought I was okay, and then I realized, "Oh, this is how I behaved with my children. This is how I behaved with my wife." And so continuing to level up, how has my past or my wiring now impacted the way that I show up in all these other arenas?
Mm. And what's interesting, again, talking about him is that he was an adult, married with a family, doctor, highly qualified professional, etc. I think before he began to realize
Mhm.
that there were unresolved issues that he had to deal with. And that makes me, now obviously, again, big T trauma, but that makes
Mhm.
me wonder how many of us are walking around with unresolved issues. Maybe the answer
Oh,
is all of us.
Yes, yes. I would agree. It's just to what effect do they impact us? How ugly are they? How
Yeah.
strong do they show up? But yeah, I don't think there's hardly anybody you sit with that doesn't have something from our past that is it just affects and impacts the way that we show up. It becomes the filter with how we see life, how we see relationships, and how we see ourselves.
So it affects our self-esteem.
Mhm. Absolutely. And the hard part is most people don't realize that they are being impacted by these negative life events from earlier in their life. They just think it's who they are. They think it's their personality. They just think, well, this is just me. And some of that is true. Certain parts of, right, our personalities are just us, but there are definitely parts of the way that we respond that are us because of our past. And when we can integrate those memories and when we can heal those parts of us that have been hurt, or even look at the messages we were given and realize that they aren't the truth about us and we change them, it changes how we show up. Does it change our personality? Maybe a little. Does it, but it changes the way that we react.
I wonder when you talk about personality, because I had this conversation with some friends recently. I think personality is something that's extraordinarily difficult to define.
Mhm.
Because because when I look at, I'm almost 60 years of age. So when I look at my life and my childhood, I can see that certain events, and I mostly had a positive life with not too many. I've had none of those big T traumas, but
Mhm.
I can still look back and see how over the path of my life, different things have led me to make certain decisions about myself, about the world. Over a period of time, maybe 10, 20 years later, I call those my personality. And
Right.
then if you unpick that, you go, okay, but when you were 2, 5, 10, 15 years of age, whatever it was, maybe when I was still growing up, maturing, I experienced something, I made a decision about it, and now I embedded that decision. And I
Mhm.
forgot there was a decision making process. It just becomes how I respond to the world. And now I call that my
Mhm.
personality. So, what I'm wondering is, how on earth do we pick apart what is this is my personality, this is Laurel's personality, as opposed to this is a learned behavior?
Right. I think it's a great question, right? It goes back to even the nature versus nurture issue that everybody talks about, like how much was I born with and how much of my life events impacted who I was. And I like what in the, internal family systems model, Richard Schwartz talks a lot about. There's the self, which is who we are, and then there's these parts of us that are created out of the events that we've had. And I feel like that's a good way to look at it, right? There's who when we came out initially, when we were younger, who were we? But then what did these different events do that brought these parts out in us? That some of them protect us, some of them help us, but some of them they hinder us in time. And so what I tell a lot of people is the way that you know is if somebody says they behave a certain way and they're uncomfortable with it or they're like, I'm not sure why I do that. And I can start to say, well, feel in your body how you feel when you react that way. And then I'll say, okay, now where else in your life have you felt that before? When they start to track back and they can land upon a memory set or an event that they're like, oh my gosh, I felt that way the first time when my mom told me I wasn't a good reader, let's pretend. And I'll say, okay, so is that truth or is that a new narrative that was created from that moment? And is that really who you are now when you get nervous, right? Every time you're supposed to read in front of people. Are you really shy or are you just insecure because of that moment in your life? And when we can go back and we can take those moments and we can, in a sense, metabolize them, help the brain to process them, it's amazing what will happen. That moment then stops having power over them. And you could then send them out. Let's say they decided to do some work around that 2 days later, and they are given an opportunity to read in front of people, and they will not have that negative feeling about it. And they'll be able to do that with complete neutrality and ease. So, in a moment like that, I would say that wasn't your personality. That was a stuck moment from your life that became the filter and became the new narrative with how you talked about yourself. And that's how I look at things with people. If it's distressing and it's something you wish were different, well, then maybe that's not a part of your personality.
Well, that suggests that all aspects of our personality, we sit naturally with them and they're not distressing to us.
Right.
So, at whatever age that begins to shift, is
Hmm.
that what that says? Is that if something sits naturally to you, whatever that may be, whether
Yeah.
you're introvert, extrovert, whatever it is,
Mhm.
you're comfortable in that place. And when you experience the discomfort
Mhm.
is when you should question it or explore it at least.
Beautiful. You put that perfectly. Yes, it's who is myself? Where am I just at peace with behaving this way? Right? So you can have the introverts that are like, I'm totally cool with sitting at home, reading my book, only being social 3 times a week. No problem at all. But then if you have that person that says that and they're like, I don't want to be this way, I want to be different, I would poke at that a little bit and see what that's about. And then always the question of, have you always been that way? I ask people that a lot.
Mm.
Well, let's go back. Were you like this at 7, 8, right? There's lots of developmental places in our life that we learn certain things, right? Trust versus mistrust. We can learn to be curious. Do we feel safe, right? Who are we? When we have things that become, I call them hiccups, right? Or life events in those moments where those parts of our personality are created, if something happens that's been negative or impactful, we may not show up the way that we need to because of that event. So let's say when we're learning to be trusting people and we have a parent or somebody that abandons us or wounds us, we're going to be very mistrustful. But is that because we're mistrustful as a person naturally? Or is it because of what happened? So, and then when people say, I can't stand it, I'm in these relationships, I want to trust and I can't. Well, that tells me we've got something to delve into there. I think this is a little deeper than the relationship.
Yes, so their nature is to be trusting, but
Mhm.
it's like they just can't seem to
Mhm.
control their nature. For some reason, that's what's coming to mind. You talk about that is overeating.
Mhm.
That people go, I don't want to overeat. I want to eat a proper diet, etc. But I'm compelled to eat. Does that? Am
Mhm.
I left of field?
No,
Is
that
that
is
fall into the
perfect.
question here?
So, people come to me literally saying what you just said.
Okay.
They know that this does not fit with who I am. I'm doing this thing, but I have no idea why. I just know that either it feels addictive, out of control, or just feels so good. And so much of that, yeah, it ties back to, oh, the craziest things we land on when I do sessions with people. Sometimes it can be abuse. Sometimes it can be as, oh, I had a woman earlier this year. It was as small as she went to a family event and her mom had, I think she was like 7 years old or something. Her mom had left her in front of this table with all of these appetizers. But the mom was really about showing up in a certain way. And the daughter was sitting there by herself, had no one to play with. And the mom came upstairs and she was like, do not eat anything off of that table. That's all it took. She never realized it. That was the moment that started to give her food issues. She sat there all alone, had nothing to do. I want to eat this food. I want to eat this food, but I can't eat this food. If my mom comes up, I'm going to get in trouble for eating this food. Crazy how that happened, but that was a moment of impact. Now, her mother also had issues with food that she saw as well, but that was the moment that when we integrated that, she has a completely different relationship with food now. And it was so crazy. We were in the session, we were doing the work, and she was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. She's like, I can see this table, I can see the food, and I never even thought about this moment. She's like, but this is the moment that changed everything. I mean, it was like 30 years later.
What I'm amazed is that the people can remember that moment.
Mhm.
Can they? Can your clients always go back to that moment?
So typically, yes, because it's held within your body first. And within your body, it then matches back to the moment. So, except, I mean, there's sometimes when you have super egregious trauma, and yes, people can't remember that. But moments like this, yes. But they're so small, again, like I started out saying, these small t traumas, these moments that they don't realize it, they would never go back to it. And so, when I can get people to sit in that space and just say, feel how that feels in your body. And now don't even try to think, but just let your brain start showing you images.
Mm.
Where is it bringing you? They'll be like, okay, this is so weird. I just saw blank. And I'll be like,
Yeah.
let's go with it. And it's so crazy how you do that. And it just lifts things.
Mm. But I have this thing I've come up with myself just for how I live that I can almost always trust my body, but my mind will lie to me.
Yes.
So in that I'll go into a situation and my mind will go, "You're completely comfortable here, Paul. You're about." My mind is giving me all this stuff
Yes.
and trying to convince me, but my body's communicating a different story.
Yes.
What I've tried and learned to do over the years is go, your body will not lie to you.
Right.
Your
You're
body, your
exactly right.
mind will, but your body will not lie to you. Is that your
Mhm.
practical experience that we can almost always trust the
Yes.
sensations of our
Oh,
body?
Yes. That is such my goal with my clients. And like, I want you to learn to trust your gut, I call it.
Mm,
Because every time when my clients and I work through things, they'll be like, well, this is how I felt in the situation. And I'll say, what did your gut tell you? And they will often say, well, my gut told me, don't stay with that person. Don't go there. Don't do this. But I did anyways because my head told me to. And
mm.
so much of our work is we're disconnected from our head and our gut, right? For various reasons. But usually, if you listen to your gut, I'm like, it's always right. It always knows.
You said something earlier about returning to, who was I before this event?
Hmm.
And it really sounds like the work you're doing is taking, I mean, what is the self? We could get into a very deep philosophical
Right.
conversation. We'd be here for hours.
We
Um,
would be, yes. So let's not.
I'm not qualified to have that conversation, but there is a sense. Sorry, there is a sense of self in that I feel comfortable in
Mhm,
this moment. I feel comfortable in my body or whatever.
mhm,
This feels natural to
mhm,
me.
mhm,
When you're talking about self, is that what you mean? That people are resting in that place where they
mhm,
feel at ease and
mhm.
they feel comfortable.
Yes, and when you do the work around, like you said, bringing them back to the moment they were before, like you started out with, sounds
Yes,
like I'm bringing
which I
people
heard
back
you saying,
to.
so I stole from you. So
Yes, no, that's absolutely what it is,
yeah,
because when you can I say that when we do the work that's necessary, we're reset to who we were before that moment happened that redefined us. There
yeah.
was the us, so let's call it ourself, the us, whoever we are, right, in a more pure
I mean,
form.
just to interrupt you there, I mean, isn't that beautiful for anyone listening? Who would not want to be reset back to who they were before the environment and whatever sort of mini even or major traumas defined us? Who would not want to be brought back to that purity? I certainly would be, please.
Exactly, all of us, right? Because
Yeah.
that again is so much of, so who am I without this weight? Who am I
Oh,
without this heaviness, without these messages, without these things through my mind? And so,
yeah,
yeah, so much of my work, that's what I say to people. We're going to reset you to who you were before
yeah.
this event happened. You will not lose the message and the lessons from those things. Because, right, some people will get scared and say, well, Laurel, if I do that work, then I'm going to trust everybody. And I can't trust everybody. And I say, no, 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 no. You have gotten the information you need. Your body takes the lessons that it needs from that event, but we just don't need it to be lingering so that
Yeah.
now it's applying going forward that you need to not trust anybody. So let's do the work. Let's reset you to the pure form of who you were before that happened while you still get to keep the knowledge of what you
Yeah.
gained from that experience.
Yes, you can still be an intelligent human being, which says,
Mhm.
I don't give everyone who calls me my bank account
Yes.
details.
Yes.
But I don't have to walk into the world and be distrustful of every human being. I can be a very trustful person and not
Exactly.
be a fool, I think is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah, like one of the examples I use with my clients a lot is I talk about, in the most simplest of forms, like let's say I work with somebody who got in some type of a tragic accident with fire.
Mm,
I'm going to process that trauma because people after that, right, they're afraid of fires, they're afraid of,
mm,
anything that looks that way. Well, that's not a good way to live. That's hypervigilance. And we understand why your body wants to protect you, but it's keeping you from living life to the fullest. Wouldn't it be nice to be reset to who you were before that moment happened while keeping the knowledge of what you went through? And I say to them, when I get done doing this work, you're not going to want to go jump in fires. I'm not going to take away your ability, but I'm going to reset you to that normal space, right? That neutral space, recalibrate you in a sense to who you were before that horrible event happened.
One of the transforming events in my life, again, just randomly reminded me of it when you speak of fire, was doing a fire walk. I can't remember,
Mm.
maybe 15 years ago or so.
That's
And
so cool.
have you ever experienced it?
No, so I'm super curious. I wanna hear what you have to say about this. That sounds so scary to me.
Well, it was scary for a couple of reasons. One is I didn't know I was doing it. I went away on a weekend and it happened to be part of it. And it was a very busy time in my life. And so I booked to the weekend, but didn't actually read the small print. Yeah,
Good lesson there, right?
yeah, yeah, lesson there. Yeah. So I turn up in this room, thousands of people, and I go, oh, it's a firework. Should I just leave? But I decided to stay to the firework. But to do the firewalk, I had to completely overcome my fears of walking on,
Mm,
2,000-degree hot coals. I had to over, and I had to walk in a controlled environment that people knew what they were doing. But what enabled, so I overcame that fear,
mm,
and what enabled me. to do was walk in the hot coals. And in that moment of elation of having overcome the fear, I was able then to, for a period of time, look at my life without that filter of fear and be honest with myself about all the things that needed to be different, that I might have been fearful otherwise to admit,
Mm,
whatever that could be. I don't admit I'm not happy with this because then I'm going to change something. So it was a hugely transforming event.
mm,
What it didn't mean was that now I put my hand in the fire.
exactly.
But it gave me a moment of insight.
Yes, that is so powerful. I'm so glad that you shared that. I've never heard anybody talk about it like that, that
Mm.
it helped them then apply this new filter through going forward. What am I afraid of? And assessing it differently. That's really cool.
Well, it did for a period of time
Mm.
because if you can imagine, we all live to some degree with a fear dial. And I
Yeah.
suppose when people do the trauma work, that's turned down. So if
Mhm.
my fear dial was here,
Yeah.
after walking on fires, your fear dial is down here because your body and mind is going, freak, I'm superhuman. And from that perspective, a window of
Mhm.
time, maybe it was, a weekend or something, for that, I
Okay.
can look at all the other impacts or challenges in my
Mm.
life and go, oh, whoa, whoa, hold a sec. This is superhuman me looking at this. What will I do differently?
Mm.
And that's very, very powerful. I
Mhm.
don't believe I did anything. I don't believe I lost my intelligence or my common sense.
No.
I just for a moment lost my fear. Um, this podcast is called The Inner Entrepreneur, and it's really, it's about getting entrepreneurs to look inwards.
Mhm.
My experience, and that's been my lifelong fascination. Um, my experience is most people don't want to look inwards, which, by the way, is fine with me because I accept the fact I'm a particular sort of human being, and that's cool that everyone is.
Mhm.
So the two questions I have out of that is, one is that your experience that most people don't want to do that sort of inner work, is the first question, and the second question is, but do they need to?
Yes, and yes. Those are
Yes,
the
yes.
answers. So, but I should be careful with my first yes. Initially, I think most of us are hesitant for inner work because we worry what we're gonna find, right?
Yeah,
What's
fear.
lingering inside. Absolutely. I find most people come to the place of inner work when the pain is too great, right? That saying, "Until the pain of change is greater than the pain of remaining the same, I will remain."
Mm.
So, usually that's the catalyst. So, if it takes pain for us to do the work, then are we naturally wired to do it? Probably not. Now, you get some people that are just amazing and they're that type of person. They're forever learners. They're always wanting to go on this journey of transformation and they just come right in and they buckle up and they're like, all right, what can we find? And let's dig it out. I want to be the best version of me. I wouldn't say that is the average cat. So, and then, yeah, when we do that work, it does change so much for the good. And I think all of us need to spend some time going inward and seeing what's happening. It doesn't mean we all have these huge, horrible things in there, but life is messy. We get hurt. If we've ever been hurt, if we've ever been betrayed, if we've ever, you know, lost a relationship, it doesn't mean all those things create something, but there's no way to go through life without getting hit by any of that. And so I think it's important to just assess from time to time, what am I hanging on to that I didn't realize might still be impacting the way that I hear people speak, the way that I interpret people's behavior, their reactions, the way that I'm hearing my child talk, the way that I'm hearing my partner talk. There's just so much in that people realize too late. One of the biggest things people say to me is, I wish I had started this work sooner.
So what's interesting to me there is that you're saying that most people probably needs to do some sort of inner exploration. I suppose those still listening to the podcast may fall into that category, because otherwise you switch on going, who's he talking to this week? I'm not interested in that. When's he going to have another entrepreneur on? I'm not.
I'm sure.
If you're still listening, so on the basis of I'm driving my car, I'm listening to this podcast, and I consider myself a very normal, balanced, healthy individual. But I'm also going, yeah. I mean, we've all experienced some sadness, some challenges in our lives. Where are the messages to us? and I'm not. I mean, we'll talk about the deep trauma individuals in a moment. So we're not this category. I
Mhm,
haven't been in a car crash. I'm not a first responder,
mhm,
but I'm aware that I must have experienced something.
mhm,
What are the messages? What are the signals? How can I look to my life and go, I wasn't
mhm,
really acknowledging that, but these are probably messages to me that I would benefit from doing
mhm.
some of this type of work.
That's such a great question. So I always tell people notice where your reaction is a bit extra, where you're showing up a little bit more than everybody else. So let's say you're in a room with 10 people, something happens. Most people seem pretty calm and they're not impacted by what's happened. And you're sitting there going, seriously? Like, I'm very upset about what's happening. And you're noticing that your reaction doesn't match the rest of the room. Quite often, that can be an indicator that you're being triggered. So, where I like to focus with people is a trigger. And a trigger is one of those moments that you know that your emotions and your reactivity is a bit higher than it probably should be. So, noticing when is that happening? When am I overreacting? Right? Because overreactions are typically they're the portal to what's going on inside of you. And it's also when you're in that space that you walk away and you say, not so proud of how I handled that. I thought I was going to show up differently in that meeting, in that relationship, in that moment. And that doesn't align with, here we go back to self, like who I really think that I am, how I want to show up. So there are these moments that you just feel a little like, not my best. In those moments, that's when I would say that is where you can go back and start to question what was I feeling in my body? What was I reacting to? And what other moments in my life made me feel that same way? And then you're going to find that moment that, as small as it might be, has somehow started to impact you. And you're trying to protect yourself to never feel, even if it's just a little bit, that little bit of pain again.
That's very interesting because I think when I began to notice my own emotional triggers, it was those situations where, in any sort of a professional or personal situation, where afterwards, when the dust had settled, I went, "Ooh, I overreacted there. I overreacted,"
Yeah.
and what I learned doing that is that overreaction almost always led to a worsening of the situation. So it
Mhm.
made it worse and it
Yes.
extended the situation. So
Mhm.
I should have, maybe I needed to communicate something to you. Maybe I need to say something directly to Laurel. That's okay. But I didn't need to shout and scream
Yes.
at you. And now what could have been
Mhm.
resolved in a simple conversation, now I've really pissed Laurel off. And now this goes on and on and on. So
Mhm.
I think that. So I'm going to say I think that I have experienced that, and hands up, I've done that.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm guessing I'm not alone in that world.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's how it does show up, and I think most people can relate to that, and that's why I always like to say, "When you're a little bit extra," right? Sometimes
Yeah,
extra is good and sometimes extra is not so good.
yeah. We still seem to be at the lower end of it. Um, Talk to me about the real trauma that people experience and how sorry, I shouldn't say real trauma because that's unfair. People can experience small things and they can have a big impact and a big upset.
Mhm,
But talk about the sort of trauma that we classify as I don't know what those traumas are.
mhm,
Serious accidents, maybe it's a sudden bereavement or a car crash
mhm.
or whatever. Are they most of the clients that walk in your door?
Actually, no.
No.
Uh,
Wow. Okay.
it's very interesting. So, back, let's say 10 years ago, 9 years ago when I started doing this work, yes.
Mm,
That's what I had because, right, you put out a sign that says trauma, you're a trauma specialist, you
yeah.
got all that stuff coming in. It's stuff from childhood abuse,
Yeah.
it's, things from divorce,
Mm,
infidelity, things like that, accidents, murders, you name it, rapes. I did a lot of that in the beginning. But what was interesting is my clients would come back to me and they would say, "Do you know how you helped me get over the death of my father?" And meaning like I found my father in a really yucky way and that
yeah.
was very traumatic. But could you help me with this issue in my relationship? I don't know why I struggle with blank. And so then I would use the same method I used with big T trauma to deal with that. I would trace it back the same way, find the moment of inception, and found that that worked exactly the same. So, what started to happen was my clients would keep coming back to me with other areas in their life that they just wanted to improve, but
mm,
they knew that it was from somewhere, but they didn't know where it was from and they didn't know how to process it.
mm.
So, through the last 9 years or so, I went from this. I still do plenty of big T trauma, trust me. I get that. That
We
everyone
have
knows
we
all day
have
long. They
it.
can come to. But I've moved and pivoted into this space of really helping entrepreneurs and high performers
Mm,
who want to do better. Sometimes now the thing that they're coming to me for is actually attached to a bigger trauma and they didn't even know it. Sometimes that is the work, but sometimes it's attached to something that they had never recognized before. But the answer being my process, whether it's big or small, it's absolutely the same. I do the same thing with both of them.
yeah. Um, Entrepreneurs, I think, are not always known for their emotional intelligence.
I think you're right about that. Yes. There's definitely more resistance. I notice with some of my high performers, they've learned to compartmentalize very well. That is one thing that I've noticed. And that's what helps them do so well, right?
Mm,
They are not going to get thrown from an emotional situation. They're going to take it, box it up, something bad can happen, and they're going to keep performing. They're going to do really well. But this is also what I've noticed. You can't do that forever. So
mm.
I'm getting people in their
Pay a
40s and in
price.
their 50s. Yeah, I almost like to describe to people, and I find this across the board too, whether you're my first responder or whether you're my CEO. You've been able to do this work without attending to your emotions or attending to the images or attending to the memory for 10, 15, 20 years, let's say. But then something happens. It's like each time it's this building and it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And then suddenly there's this like seeping out that I notice. And that's when you have what we just talked about, these reactions that are not good, or you're not sleeping good anymore, or you're losing your hair suddenly, or all these things are happening because your body knows what's going on regardless. And I feel like it's at that point that then they're like, I don't know really what's going on with me, but there's something happening. And they're not going to think that it's tied to anything from either their childhood or even from just 10, 15 years ago, even just a business deal that went bad that they've just not processed.
Mm,
But those are the people that, because they're so high functioning, which again is a gift, it hits them later. But when it hits, it's almost like they're at a 9 out of 10, which is mean you're going to explode or implode,
mm.
and they feel it. And then it's time to do that work.
Yeah, they've had the wherewithal to function normally and
Hmm.
carry this.
Hmm.
But if I understand that what's going on is they're storing it in their body,
Hmm.
and the body
Absolutely.
eventually can no longer
Yes.
carry that, and we implode or explode.
Yep, totally. That's a perfect way to say it, and that's what I see a lot, and then when they come, it's like all this stuff is kind of popcorning out, I call it. They've got, this thing from my childhood and the time that I had a home invasion when I was 20 and then the car accident when I was 30, and their body's just like, "Ah!" Like, we need to process this, and what's so great is it's not hard work. I mean, you can do some of these things in one session, 90 minutes, get this stuff cleared out. It's amazing. Like, car accident, bing, bang, boom, done. You can come, you couldn't drive in the car without a panic attack, leave the office, you're fine. So the nice thing is, if people could really get the message, and this is what I'm so passionate about, this work does not have to be crazy hard. Now, granted, if you've gone 50 years and you've had a lot of things and you've not focused on them, you're hanging with me for a day or two. Like, we're going to do some hard work. We have a lot of things that we have to pull, but really, there's so much that you can calm the nervous system and reset it in a short amount of time. Because what people don't understand is this work is natural. Your brain, it wants to do it. The reason it's triggered is because it's telling you, hello, could you please pay attention to me so we could put this to rest so we could keep functioning really well?
So once people have gone through this process with you, do they learn how to behave differently? Because it sounds like what happened is an event has happened, we call it a trauma, whatever, and
Mhm.
we respond to it in a particular way, but we don't process it. It sounds like we suppress it as opposed to processing, so we carry it. We move on, we take the next, we, pi- we pile this up, and eventually we can't function. So when we clear that, I don't know if,
Mhm.
or integrate that, whatever's the word you would use,
Yeah.
when we integrate that, do we have we also learned how to process our emotions differently? In other words, the next time I come across a minor or a major traumatic event,
Mhm.
am I now better positioned, skilled to handle that, so I'm not continuing to build on my trauma?
Yes, I would say yes. So this is the pattern I see in my clients. So they'll come in, we'll process something. And what I love about this type of work is that you don't have to cognitively, now, granted, there's integration work, and we're going to talk about ways that you've reorganized around your trauma that you're going to have to recognize and change. But the difference between this work and cognitive behavioral work is cognitive behavioral work, you have to cheerlead yourself through it and say, okay, when I go into the meeting this time and so uses that voice that drives me crazy, I am going to bite my tongue and I'm going to sit on my hands and I'm not going to say anything. That's work that we can tell you're consciously aware of, but you've not integrated something that's bothering you. When you do the integrative work, you'll walk into that next meeting and you do not have to say, bite your tongue, sit on your hands. It's
Okay.
a nothing. It's neutralized. There is nothing to learn because you're not triggered. It was about the trigger. It wasn't about your inability to behave yourself. But because when we're triggered, our brain goes offline, it doesn't matter how much CBT we do, we're not in prefrontal cortex. So we're not thinking that way anyways. So if I can pull your trigger, get
Yeah.
your amygdala to chill out, you're going to go in that meeting and it's a non issue. Now, what I find is that when we start to do this work, my clients, they'll come back to me and be like, oh my gosh, I need to work with you again on blank. Because once they identify and they see how it works, it's almost like their brain does this amazing work of, ooh, now we know how to recognize when we're being extra and we know what it's attached to, or we just know that we're being extra and we know we need to do some work here. So I really love the fact that when they work with me once or twice, they are so keenly aware going forward of when they have another stuck point versus, oh, this is just a behavior I have to act differently around. So I'll educate my clients on that when we're done and I'll say, okay, while we just processed that rape, we still are going to have to talk about what does this look like when you get intimate with somebody after. But the difference being you're going to have to be intentional, but you're not going to have the resistance of your body trying to protect you anymore. So there still is going to be some work because you've learned to act a certain way, but it's not going to be as hard to retrain the body and how to act. Sometimes it just acts fine right away, and sometimes it doesn't. So there's a little bit of a difference on what that looks like after, but people become really aware of what it looks like when you're stuck after you've done this work.
I suppose we slowly desensitize
Mhm,
ourselves. So as I pile up the stress, the trauma, or whatever, I'm maybe less consciously aware of it as it comes
mhm,
into me. And when you clear that slate and
mhm.
return me to this self before, now I know what that tastes like. I know what it means to live there. And when I'm pulled out of it, I very quickly recognize, oh, I don't want to be there.
Yes.
Help me return to here. Whereas prior to that, I didn't have that reference point because I was already mega stressed. I was already a mess.
Yes. Oh my gosh, let me give you a beautiful story that exemplifies that. So I worked with a man probably 6 weeks ago, and he was having a really hard time with his son. Every time his son would get dysregulated, it would trigger him in the craziest of ways. So we traveled back, did the work. It had to do with the dynamics of him and his father and his mother in his childhood. So we processed that memory set. We got done with the session. The next day he texted me, I'm doing great. Oh my gosh, my son was dysregulated. Nothing. I was completely neutral. I didn't feel like I had to handle the situation. So he did good for about 10 days. Then all of a sudden, he was like, texted me and he said, I don't know what's going on, Laurel, but I'm starting to have this anxiety and feeling the way that I used to feel. He was like, I felt great for 10 days and now I suddenly don't feel that way anymore. What happened? So we met again. Well, there was another memory set there. So while we had cleared that first memory, he didn't realize there was another moment later in his childhood with his father that was feeding that same feeling. Cleared that. Now he's perfectly fine. So it's so interesting how sometimes there's multiple sets of memories that we need to clear or moments in our life, but that when we do that, he knew so keenly aware, like you said, he was like, oh my gosh, this felt so good to not be triggered. And that the minute he started to feel again, he was like, oop, don't want to go here again. I need to figure out what's living behind this sensation. And then immediately, boom, we knew what it was and could clear it out.
It's a great story, but also what I'm thinking is just saying that it's what do we normally do in those moments where we feel uncomfortable? We reach for alcohol, we reach for
Mm-hmm.
a cigarette, we reach
Yes.
for narcotics, for TV, for Netflix, for
Mm-hmm.
like
Yes.
we experience that discomfort. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
we don't recognize it. Maybe we actually don't know what it is because it hasn't been part of our education,
Right.
and we look to suppress it and to dull the sensation so
Mm-hmm.
we can get on with life.
Yes.
I guess that's what most of us are probably doing who are not doing some of this inner work.
Yes, numbing, right? That's what we do when something feels uncomfortable because we were created to not like discomfort. We don't like pain. Our system wants to push away from it. So, to even do this work, it's a very brave thing
Mm,
because the natural tendency is when this gets above my threshold of tolerance, I'm
mm.
going to numb myself, right? That's just kind of what we do. I'm going to ignore it or do something else or push myself into other work so that I do not have to attend to what's happening.
And what you're doing is taking people back into it to, are we re-experiencing it or
Mhm.
yes, okay.
Yes,
So
it's
obviously that sounds very scary because I've spent
yes.
my entire life trying to pretend that never happened.
Mhm.
Now Laurel
Mhm.
wants me to come back
Yes.
and re-experience it.
Yes, that and that's what I always tell people. I say, full disclosure, this is gonna be uncomfortable for about 6, 8 minutes
Wow.
as you have to
6 minutes is
re-experience
so long.
and it might be in and out throughout, but the most intense part
It's better than
is
60 years.
well, that's what I tell people,
Yeah.
right? Right, like, you and the thing is you are uncomfortable already or you wouldn't be hanging with me. So, like, we
Yeah, yeah.
could
Why
keep
are you
doing
here?
that. Exactly, or we can re-experience this horrible thing that happened to you, and yes, it's going to be uncomfortable because you have to relive it, it's part of the exposure, right? But then once you go back to it, your body is present with it, and then you can process it, and then it goes away, and then it loses its power, it loses its intensity. But yeah, I'm I tell people even when they come to see me for intensives, I'm like, it's hard work. You're going to be like a noodle when you leave. There's a lot to it, but it's such a short amount of time given the rest of your life of being triggered and of living this way. So yeah, when people come to work with me, it's, not all rainbows and sunshine right away, but it's not horrible at
But
the
it
end.
leads to rainbows and sunshine, hopefully. Where
Exactly.
do anxiety and depression fit into this?
Oh, this has been such a journey for me, right? Because I didn't always work with trauma. And so I had ideas about anxiety and depression and how to work with them. And then once I started to realize that these moments in our life are also the inception points of anxiety and depression for some people, granted, not all, I want to go after that stuff so hard before I'm going to send you for meds or send you even to go into regular talk therapy. Because what I also noticed with my clients was this: they would come in and say what they wanted to work on. But if I didn't work on their trauma, I could sit there and do cognitive behavioral work and talk about coping skills and yada, 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 and all this stuff with their depression and anxiety. And we could be at it for months. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, yeah, here's this trauma. We'd process that. And it was like a no brainer. They were fine. And the work was done. It expedites the work. So I got to the point that I started to say to clients that would come to me, not necessarily for trauma, that if you have any trauma and you're open to it, we're going to process this first because it's going to probably take out 60% of the work that we would have been working hard towards anyways if we just clear from the get go. So I do believe a lot of that is just our nervous system and our brain organizing around these horrible events.
So there's a book I'm sure you're very familiar with. Basil van der Klok, is it?
Yeah.
The Body Keeps a
Mhm.
Score, uh, which seems to me to be very in line with this. It's a
Mhm.
number of years since I read it, but if I remember his study dealing with some very serious trauma in people
Mhm.
is that he found medication very helpful to some
Mhm.
people who had experienced an extreme trauma who were not functioning. And he
Yes.
found that medication was very helpful to
Mhm.
return them to a functioning place. But if I
Mhm.
recall correctly, from that functioning place, he wanted then to do therapy to move them out the other side.
Yeah.
It seems to me, I have very little knowledge of this, but it seems to me that we have, as a society, become stuck in that place of medication. People are anxious or depressed. We treat them, it helps, but we're
Mhm.
stopping there, which is, I
Yes.
think, different to where he suggested we needed to go.
Yes. Oh, and that's such truth. I completely agree. I Why would you want to just Band-Aid it? It works, but it doesn't get to the root,
Yeah.
right? And granted,
It's
there's a
a
reality
tool.
in Yeah, there's reality in chemical imbalances. It's a real thing. But were those chemical imbalances, are they genetic? That's one route, right? But are they environmental? Is it because of the way that you were brought up, right? Cortisol, having that be super high your whole life, that's going to mess with your brain chemicals, your hormones, everything. And I think you're right. I'm the same way. When I see people, if you're not functioning well and you are so anxious that you can't go to work or you can't sleep, we're not going to do good work anyways. So let's get you stabilized.
Yeah,
But after you're stabilized, let's do the work. And then if you decide when you're in a better place that you want to see what your life looks like off the meds, well, then under a doctor's care, sure, let's go for it. And that's true. Some clients find they do not need the medication anymore because they have now fixed the root of the problem.
yeah. The other person that comes to mind studying your work is Michael Singer. Are you familiar with Michael Singer and the Untethered
No.
Soul? No,
Mm-mm.
okay. So I'm a meditator for 40 years, and I study a lot of spiritual teachers. And one of the wisest men I've ever studied is a man called Michael Singer, and he wrote a hugely successful book called The Untethered Soul. And I've listened to him and studied him a lot over the years because to me, there's just such amount of wisdom. And so he comes from a yoga tradition. He's from the US, but he comes from a yoga tradition. And he talks about something called samskaras, I think he calls them, which is like energy in the
Mm.
body. And so he talks about all of these stresses and depression and all this stuff. He talks about them as samskaras. So we have these samskaras and they become trapped in our body.
Mm.
And then we walk around in this world of emotional triggers. In other words, I walk around and I seem fine as long as you don't bump off me. It's like a bruise all over. But if you
Yeah.
touch me, it's like, oh, I can't, but I seem fine.
Yes.
And he talks about all of these samskaras as stored energy that we have
Mm.
that we
Mhm.
have to release. And
Mhm.
in the process of releasing them, it is also similar in that we have to be willing to experience them because the energy is traveling through our body, and when we're willing to experience it, it travels through our body and moves on out. It
Yes.
seems so. It's a spiritual teaching, but it seems so similar and rooted in the work that you're actually doing.
That is the experience my clients have. It's
Yeah.
so true. So after my sessions, a lot of clients will say, I feel lighter, right? Because there has been this release, there has been this lift, and it's very physical. It's not just, oh, I feel lighter. And
Yeah.
everybody says it. So something's happening there. And then also when we do this work, it's amazing. People will get tingly on their fingertips and it's almost like the energy is in their body and it is and it's coming out and it's going through them where they feel tingly in their head. There is definitely something going on with the energy in somebody's body when this is happening. So I agree with that 100%.
How and when did you come to this work? Because I know you developed a very specific method, your own method that you use.
Mhm.
How did you come to that method?
To the mint method that I
Yeah.
use now.
Is that what you predominantly use? The mint method?
Yes, so now I use Mint. So it's been a progression of the first method I was trained in was accelerated resolution therapy, and that was my basis. That's what changed everything that I knew to be true about trauma because as my story goes, which I'm sure you know, I never did trauma for the first 17 years
Yeah.
because I knew I couldn't help people, and I'm all about helping people.
Yeah.
So, once I learned to do that, it blew my mind and it showed me the power of memories and the way that our brain stores things. And it showed me the power of not having to consciously make sense of everything all the time, but to really just somatically work through things and allow these memories to be metabolized.
Mm.
So once I used that, and then I was a trainer in that for years to other therapists, because I was like, we got to get people out here doing this work because it's so powerful. I was then trained in EMDR, and I love that because that hits parts of people's memory networks and trauma differently than ART did. So I started to put that in with some of my work. And then I started to use what's called critical memory integration, which goes even further to let's talk about your earlier self and where that fits in with this work, right? Because typically, if you come in for a car accident or you come in for some issue in a relationship, in some of the other modalities, it doesn't necessarily say, let's go back to your earlier you. Let's see what you looked like in that moment. Let's see what you didn't have in your life. It's here's the problem. Let's clear it. Let's go. So once I started using all these different methods, what I found was that I started to create this formula and this protocol that brought them all together and I weaved them all together. And when I did that, it was like Well, ART was great, but when I added CMI to it, it was even better. And
Mm,
then when I took those two and I added EMDR to it, when I had to process things that were showing up that the other two models couldn't process properly, or the way that I felt like brought the most resolution, it was even better. So it became this almost steroidal process of I can hit earlier self stuff, I can integrate other memories that you didn't come in with, and I can help you resolve what you came to me for all within one session. And once I started to see that I was using it in the same way every time, I was like, oh, I have a thing going here, I guess. And it was actually my web developers. They were the ones that were like, Laurel, you need to stop saying that you use all three of these methods. Could you please just come up with your own?
it
Because it's a
confuses
lot.
people, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, it's just a lot to say every time I use this, this, and this. He was like, because really, it is your own method. If you're using parts of all three of them, you're not using one in and of itself, which I'm not.
Mm.
So that's how I developed Mint. And so now when people see me, that's what I use with them.
So, two questions come to mind. The first question is on talk therapy, because you've referred to it. A couple of things I've noticed. One is that in the US, it's commonplace to have a therapist and to talk to a therapist. In Ireland, I'm in Ireland. In Europe, Ireland, the UK, other parts of Europe, I don't believe it is. I'm not saying we don't have therapists, but
Right.
I would have said it's not. Someone doesn't go, oh, I have a therapist. I've had a therapist for years. That's a you. If there's something wrong, you go to a therapist. However, in recent years, I've noticed a number of people I know who now are seeing therapists regularly. And off the top of my head, I can name. I obviously won't, but I can name five people who I know are going to a therapist. The thing about those people I'm thinking of is that, in my view, they are balanced, happy, fulfilled. Like, they're not troubled people. They're people
Right.
living happy, fulfilled, successful lives, but are finding benefit in in having this talk therapy. Where does talk therapy fall into what you do? Because I know that would have been where you started off, as I
Yes.
understand it.
Hmm.
What I'm hearing, and maybe, and this is what I want to clarify, is talk. Does talk therapy still have its place, or is it just
Hmm.
not going far enough?
Hmm. Talk therapy definitely has its place. People will say that to me a lot. Well, do you believe in that? I'm like, oh yeah. Like I I don't do it so much now, but there are sessions that are talk therapy sessions where I'm not doing any of this integrative work.
Mm.
It's really helpful after we've pulled the most major stuff, because then we need to talk about what does this look like? How is this showing up? How do you behave differently? And sometimes if you don't have stuck parts, talk therapy is great, right? Just having a different perspective and looking at things differently. So I believe in talk therapy. To be totally honest, I just would rather do this work now.
Yeah,
I'm like, I compare it a lot. I tell people, I'm the ER doctor. I'm not the physical therapist.
yeah.
So you're coming into me and you're bleeding and wounded. Like, I love that work. Let's get in there. Let's heal you up. Let's get this big wound taken care of.
We
But
go
you're still
straight to the
gonna,
problem.
yeah, that's me. Like, that's what I wanna do. I want you to feel good. I want you to feel better. But there's gonna be some physical therapy needed after the surgery, right,
Yeah,
that we gave you.
yeah,
So, I feel like that's almost more like the talk therapy.
yeah,
Like, I relate it to that. Like, that's where we're looking through things and we're still integrating the work that's done. And again, I'm a fan of it. I have plenty of people that they'll come in, and once we get done with this work, this is how I know that they're coming towards the end of their work with me. When you've come in for the heavy lifting, and we've gotten through it, and especially with EMDR, that takes a lot more sessions when I have people that need EMDR and I don't use Mint, but just use EMDR with them. When we get to the end of it, it's more talk therapy.
yeah.
It's now we're talking about, okay,
You're
how.
integrating it at that point.
Yep, exactly. Once we hit that, then I'm like, okay, we're getting to the end of like our work together at this point. Mhm.
So saying that analogy makes a whole lot of sense to me. You're in a traumatic situation, you go to
Mhm.
ER and they fix you.
Yep,
And now you need some degree of rehabilitation to get your strength back. But
yep,
I wonder then, if many people are who should have gone to ER
yeah,
are with the physical therapist, and
yes.
they're never going to get better. They needed to go to ER first.
Paul, yes. That's the thing that gets me, like, people will come in and they're like, "Oh, I wish I'd done this work years ago." I'm like, "Yeah, so do I." You know?
Yeah,
Because they'll say to me, "I've been going to therapy for 5 years, for 6 years, and nothing's better." I even have other professionals that will have worked with clients for 2 years, 3 years, and they're like, "I think they need to come see you now, or someone that does
yeah.
the work that you do, because we're stuck."
We're
we're
not.
getting to yeah, and then you're realizing, like, yeah, you can be doing talk therapy with someone for 3 years, but if they've not processed their childhood sexual abuse or that they had an alcoholic father or whatever the situation is that happened, you're only gonna get so far. Like, that stuff is gonna stand in the way.
Makes sense. So when you're working in the peak performance place and you're working with, leaders, entrepreneurs, etc., are you effectively just doing the same work, or I mean, are you in that space to deal with the trauma, or are you in that space to create peak performers, or is there a difference? Is it nuance?
They overlap. So when my peak performers come to me, right, they're very specific about what's going on. What the root of it is what we don't have power and control over. So the thing that might be holding them back from being able to perform, let's say if it's an athlete, might be as small as an injury that just happened to them a year ago that they haven't gotten over. What you come to me with, we never can guarantee where it's going to land. It may land on a big T trauma, and that's the work that we have to do. Or it may land on something a little bit smaller. But most of the time, like I'll give a great example. I worked with a doctor a couple weeks ago, and like I'll give a great example. I worked with time in his for him every single week before he went into the meeting. And he was like, I don't know why. And so we could trace back a moment from when he was, again, 7 years old in his house, and it wasn't trauma, but it was something very impactful.
Hmm.
One session cleared it. I just spoke with him 2 weeks ago. He goes to the meeting every week now, completely fine. Doesn't bother him,
Hmm.
completely free. So, it's more about what are you coming to me for, and then that's how I decide where the work needs to be done. Your body will always tell me where we need to go.
I suppose no matter where you want to go, the question is what's standing in your way. No
Absolutely.
matter what, whether you're a stay-at-home mom or you're running $1 billion businesses, where do you
Yes.
want to go and what's preventing you from getting there?
That's a perfect way to put it. It's not about the what it's not about what's back there, but where do you wanna go? And then from there, then we know what to do. I mean, I have some people that will say to me, "I know I have this in my life, Laurel, but I don't wanna deal with that." There's someone last week I met with, and this is the case. He was like, "I wanna work with this, not on this." And I was like, "Okay, I'll do that for you, but I cannot promise you that this will not track back to that.
It
And if it
most
does,
likely will.
that's where we're going to go if you're okay with it." Because you can't tell your body, like, "I wanna work on this, but I don't really wanna do that deep work over there," or "I think I did it all, and I think it's okay because I'm managing, so let's just focus on this," and it doesn't always work that
So,
cleanly.
as we wrap up, how do people work, Jay? Are you do you work with everyone, all one-to-one clients, or how do people? Anyone's listening, going, "Oh, I need that." Um, how and who do you work with?
Okay. Yes, so typically, if people are interested in working with me, I meet with them for 15, 20 minutes pretty briefly and describe the work that I do to see if it's a good match, right? If someone's calling me up, I had someone a couple weeks ago and they were like, I've been in and out of the psychiatric unit, for the last 2 years. That's probably not my ideal client right now. Like, there's obviously a lot more going on. I'm going to do coaching work. That's going to be deep therapeutic work. So I was like, I'm willing to have a talk with you about your trauma if I can work on your trauma, but send you back to somebody else to like do the other pieces. That's fine. But
Because they need
typically,
the physical therapy ongoing. Yeah.
yes, yes, but the problem is their physical therapist may have never sent them to get the surgery, right? So
Yes.
I'm happy to do that part. But typically that's not my ideal client. My ideal client is that person that we're going to meet and they're going to say, "I'm stuck with this, this or this," or "I know that I've had this trauma in my life. I've never felt like I could talk to anyone about it, but I realize now it's impacting me." And so in 20 minutes, we can typically figure that out. From there, I do what's called an assessment. And so I meet with you for 60 to 90 minutes and we talk about what are these stuck points in your life, and that's where I start asking you the questions, and we can track back what traumas or moments in your life they're tied to. From there, I know how many sessions you're going to need with me. Like, oh, that's just one thing. You can be abused for 10 years and it still might only be one session,
Okay.
one or two. So from there, I can kind of give them a sense of, this looks like you're going to need to meet with me 3 times, and that's for the surgery. And then after that, if people want to do, then I follow up with them. If they want to do integrative work with me, they can. But it's a pretty formulaic process. We meet, we talk about the big moments in your life. Then I know how many sessions it's going to take to neutralize them and help you integrate them. And then after we do the heavy lifting, you can either go back to your regular clinician or you can do the work with me to do the integration piece of it as well. Because sometimes what I tell people, when we've wiped away the initial traumas, your body starts to show you other things it wanted to talk about and it couldn't because it was all it could do to hold what it was holding. And
Mhm.
that's always the part that I say to people, I can tell you right now from what you're telling me, this is what there is, but that doesn't guarantee once we clear you that your body's like, oh, good. Now can we start talking about this?
Mhm.
And so that's why I like to follow up with people after we even do the surgery, because once we heal your arm, your foot might need some surgery too.
Mm. Yeah. Let's cure the whole body.
Exactly. Yep.
So, I will put all your contact details in the show notes, but just tell people where they can find you.
Sure. They can go to my website, which is laurelwiers.com, and it's spelled Laurel, Wiers.com. Most people spell it incorrectly, so I like to fix that for them. And on there, there's a contact form, and they can just fill that out, and then we can set up a way to communicate.
Super. We will stick that in the show notes. Laurel, it's been absolute pleasure chatting to you. It's been fascinating. So many questions in my mind, but it sounds like wonderful work, and it's been a very, very informative conversation. So, Laurel, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Can I plug one thing
Oh,
too?
please plug two things.
I just gave a TED Talk, and if people are curious about the way that I talk about trauma and these small T traumas, it should be released this week, but they can look up my TED Talk, and that would be fabulous, a good way for them to get to know who I am also.
So, what date is it being released on? Because
I
it,
I'm
we,
not a
we we're probably recording this a month or so ahead of before it being
Yeah,
released.
oh, it'll be out by then.
It'll be out by then. So go to. So how will they find that TED Talk? Just
So if
Google.
you go on the TED Talk, yeah, and put my name in, and it's called Overreacting or Just Remembering.
Excellent. Okay, sounds great. Laurel, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.